Hey guys, how is it going? In today's episode of Cloud Engineering Project, I will be deploying the voting application into Azure Kubernetes Service. I have already made a video where I explained the overall architecture of the voting application. So if you have not seen that video, you can catch up with it to have a full understanding of the architecture of the voting application. So today, the focus is to deploy the application into AKS. So let's quickly get started. AKS is a Microsoft managed Kubernetes service that is used to deploy a containerized application. So this means that you must have developed your application, you must have packaged it, you must have containerized it, you must have made the application ready, right, before you can deploy it into Azure Kubernetes Service. Okay, so the application that we will be working with, which is the voting application, aka the cats versus dogs voting application, right? This application has already been developed and it has been containerized. So what I need to do is just to clone this application into my local machine and then deploy it into Azure Kubernetes Service. And obviously, before I can deploy this application into Azure Kubernetes Service, I need to have created my Azure Kubernetes service. Right in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to create an Azure Kubernetes service, and then we proceed further to deploying this application into the newly created Azure Kubernetes service. So the first thing, as I said, we need to clone the application into the local machine. Then we create an AKS on Azure. After that, we connect to the created AKS using Azure CLI. So because, we will be using Azure CLI here. If you do not have Azure CLI installed on your computer, you will need to quickly do that. Azure CLI is basically a command line interface tool that is used to communicate or manage Azure resources. Then we will also use Azure CLI to install AKS CLI. Two different things now. We have Azure CLI and then we have the Azure Kubernetes Service CLI. So basically, this AKS CLI is what will give us all of the necessary commands that we need to manage that AKS that we have created. So Azure Kubernetes Service is a resource within Azure. So if you want to communicate with this particular resource, AKS, right, we also need a command line interface tool, which is AKS CLI. So we will be using Azure CLI to install AKS CLI, right? So after we've done that, then we will deploy the application. So deploying the application simply means deploying the services that have already been packaged for us, that have already been containerized, okay? So after deploying the services in Azure using AKS CLI, we will expose the application to the internet using a load balancer so that users can access the application. So having said all this, let's quickly get started. To deploy this application, we will need to clone the application into my local machine, okay? So to clone the application, we need to go to the official GitHub page of the application, which can be found on github.com/dockersamples/example voting app, right? So right on this GitHub page, right, ensure you are on the main branch, and then you come to code here, drop down on code and click on this little copy icon to copy the URL of this repository, right, which is the example voting app repository. So I'll copy this URL and then I'll open my VS Code. So here in my VS Code now, right, I am inside of the infrastructure and operations folder. And inside of the infrastructure and operations folder, we've got two other folders here, which is VM creation and voting app, right? So this means that I have already cloned this voting application before this video, okay? But for the purpose of knowledge, I'm going to be deleting this example voting app and then I'll clone it again, okay? So I am going to be issuing a command to delete this example voting application, okay? So I'll say rm-rf, then I'll delete the voting app. So the voting application has been deleted, and as you can see, we can't find it here again. So what I'll do is, let me quickly clear my screen. So what I'll do next is, I will now clone this application into my machine, right? So I'll issue the command git clone. No, before I clone the application, let me create a new folder. And inside of the new folder is where I will now clone this application, okay? So I'll create a new folder called make directory. The new folder will be called voting test. Voting, let me just call it voting app, right? So if I ls, and as you can see on the left hand side of my screen, we can see another folder called voting app. So if I just drop down on this folder, you can see there's nothing inside of the folder. Okay, cool. So I will now cd into the folder, cd voting app. Okay, so I am inside of the voting app now, and that is where I will now clone this, the repository of the project itself. I will now clone the app, right? So git clone, and then I will paste the URL that I copied from the official GitHub page, and I will hit enter. So now the voting app application has been cloned into this folder that we've just created called voting app, right? So the name of the app is example voting app, right? So inside of the voting app folder now, if I do ls, you can see that I have this example voting app, right? So the next thing that I will do will be to cd into this project itself, which is called example voting app, right? Please don't get confused with this naming. The name of the folder is voting app, and then the name of the project is example voting app, right? So I'll go into the example voting app, right? And I am inside of the example voting app project, right? Which is basically the application, okay? So if I ls, and then you'll be able to see all of the files and folders that make up the application. The next thing that we need to do is to quickly create the AKS within Azure. I can create the AKS using AZCLI. That is very fast and easy to do, but I just quickly want to show you the interface of the AKS and let you see all of the data that we need to supply to create the AKS. Okay, so I'll go back to go to Azure, and then I'll open my Azure page here. So I will quickly come here and search for AKS, right? And then this is the one that I want to click, Kubernetes Service keyword AKS. So I'll click into that. And as you can see, I do not have any AKS created yet, okay? So everything is done from scratch. So I'll click on create, and then I'll click on Kubernetes cluster here. So I'm going to be putting this Kubernetes cluster into my subscription called Bioku subscription. I'll create a new resource group. I'll call it AKS _ dev _ test. Okay. And then I'll click on OK to create a new resource group. So this AKS that we're creating now will be housed inside of this AKS _ dev _ test resource group. Okay. The cluster preset configuration, I'm going to be leaving this as dev/test because obviously this is a test. This is not a production deployment. So I'll click here. You can see production standard, production economy, production enterprise. Depending on your own use case, you choose whatever one you think befit your requirements. So here, because this is a test, I'll choose test again. And then I'll name my Kubernetes. The Kubernetes cluster, I'll name it AKS _ test, right? So the name of my AKS is AKS _ test, right? And then I'll keep this as UK South because I'm in the United Kingdom, and yeah, you want to keep it closer to your region. So the pricing tier now, I'll keep it as free, and the Kubernetes version, I'll keep it as 1.30.9, which is the default. I'll keep everything as it is here. So the authentication and authorization to access our AKS, if I drop down on this, I prefer to always choose this Microsoft Entra ID authentication with Azure RBAC. So RBAC is role-based access control, which you can use to manage your AKS. So whatever your role is within Azure, this AKS will also inherit from it. Okay, so this AKS will also inherit that. So I'll click that option. Then I'll come to node pools here. Here, you can see that I've got an agent pool here, which is a system agent pool, but I don't want to use that. I'll click on this one and I'll delete it, right? So deleting that means that I will need to manually create a new node that I want my AKS to use. So I'll click on this add node. So I'll give my name node AKS test. Okay, so this is my this is the name of my node. So here, which is the mode, right? I'll choose system. So choosing system now. Then under the OS group, I'll click on either Azure Linux or Ubuntu Linux. You know, it doesn't really matter here, whichever one you choose, right? So here, node size, I'll click on this, choose a node size, right? And that is going to lead me to choosing a node size that I prefer to use for this node, right? So the node size basically is the configuration of the computer. And lest I forget, a node is technically under the hood a virtual machine, okay? And that is why you can see here that the node is going to use 8 virtual CPUs, and then it's going to be using 32 RAM if I choose this one, okay? So I'll choose this one, right? And if I leave this AKS that I just want to create, right, to run for 30 days, this node, which is essentially a virtual machine, is going to cost me 338.72 per month. Okay, I don't think I am going to leave this AKS to be running for 1 month, because that is going to hit deep into my wallet, and I don't want that. So I'm going to be deleting this AKS right immediately after this tutorial. So that's completely fine. I probably will only spend a few dollars. So I'll go on and select this size. I'll click on select. So I've created that size. I'll keep every other thing as default, and then I'll click on add. After creating the node, then I'll come to networking, and then I'll set a name for the DNS name prefix, right? I'll just call this one AKS network test, okay? And then I'll click on review plus create. So what's happening here is that Azure is validating all of the things that we have configured. And if the configuration is right, just as in our case now, then it throws no error. So I'll click on create to create that AKS, right? This is probably going to take a few minutes. So I'm going to be pausing this video and then restarting it when the deployment is completed. So the AKS resource is now successfully deployed. So I'll just click on go to resource, and then you'll be able to see the AKS overview page, okay? So if I click on the resource group that we created, AKS_dev_test, and then you will see that many other resources are created alongside the creation of this AKS, right? You can see Prometheus rule group, you can see the metric alert rule, you can see the action group, many other resources like that, yeah? So these are necessary things. These are necessary resources that get created when you create an AKS. And then you use that to connect to many other applications like Grafana, Prometheus, to get the metrics and also display the metrics of your AKS in a graphical user interface, right? We are not going to be doing all of those today. We just want to deploy this AKS. Okay, cool. We've deployed this AKS now. It's up and it's running. So if I go back into this AKS, and then I click on Kubernetes resources, then on workloads, then you'll be able to see the list of workloads that are presently deployed on this AKS. So what we need to now do is to deploy our own services. So immediately we finish the deployment of our services to this AKS, if everything works fine, we should be able to see our services under these workloads, right? So let's quickly get to that. So I'm going to open my VS Code. Now, inside of my VS Code, remember we are inside the example voting app application, right? Which is cloned inside the voting app folder. So I'll just quickly clear my screen, right? I am on a Linux local machine, right? So I have some tools that I'm going to be using here installed already, right? One of the tools is the Azure CLI. So if you are using a brand new machine, you will need to install Azure CLI. So you can quickly check up how to install Azure CLI on Google. So after installing Azure CLI, then you will need to log into Azure, right? Because what can we do without logging into Azure? You might be confused a little bit here but we are logged into Azure using our browser. So this is a browser login on the Azure portal, okay? But we need to log into Azure from our terminal, right? So what I'm going to be doing here will be, I will do AZ login -- tenants and then I'll specify the tenant ID of my personal Azure account. Okay, so to get the tenant ID, you come to your Azure, right? And then you search for tenant here. Then if you click on tenant properties, then you should be able to see the tenant ID here, right? So I'll copy my tenant ID, okay? And then I'll go back to my VS Code, and then I'll paste the tenant ID here, right? Then I'll hit enter. So I'll click on next. And as you can see, I have now successfully logged into Azure, right? In your case, it will ask you to input your password. And then if you have your MFA set up already, you will also be taken through that process of authenticating your MFA. But because I've already logged into my Azure, so it senses that this account is a known account and it is also active. So that's why I was not asked for any MFA authentication and I was not asked to input my password. So that's that. So I'll go back to my VS Code, and then as you can see, it's asking me to select the subscription that I want to authenticate against. So I've only got one subscription here. In your case, if you have multiple subscriptions, you'll be able to see everything here. And you should select the one that you have created your AKS inside. So because I've only got one, then I'll just select the first one, which is one here. So I'll click on enter. And now I have successfully logged into Azure using AZ CLI. Okay, so I'll clear my screen again. So the first thing that I want to do now is to use AZ CLI to install AKS CLI. Okay, so I've already done this, but yeah, why not? I can repeat it. Then I can say AZ AKS install -CLI. Then I'll hit enter for this CLI tool to be installed on my local machine. Install CLI is, I can't spell install. Do INST install. Connection error while attempting to download clients. Permission denied. I'll do sudo AZ AKS install -CLI. And then it's downloading it. It's installing AZ. It's installing AKS CLI. Now everything is installed now. I have my AZ CLI installed. I have my AKS CLI installed, right? So the next thing that I want to do, let me quickly just clear my screen. The next thing that I want to do is to connect to the AKS that we have created from the Azure interface. So I'll be connecting to that AKS so that when we deploy our application, it is deployed inside of that AKS, right? So to do that connection, I will run the following command. So I'll say AZ AKS get credential. Then after getting the credentials, I'm going to supply the name of the resource group, and I will also supply the name of the AKS, right? So -- resource group. And what is the name of our resource group? Let's quickly confirm. If I go back to home here, and then this is the name of our resource group, AKS_dev_test. So I'll copy this one, and then I will paste it here. So resource group, and then the next thing will be -- name, which is the name of the AKS itself. So I'll come back to Azure and then click into the AKS. This is the name of the AKS here. So I'll copy this one too, and then I'll paste the name here. Okay, so basically that's the command AZ AKS get credentials, then you specify the resource group, and then you specify the name of the AKS. So I'll hit enter now to connect to the AKS. And as you can see now, matched. So we have successfully connected to the AKS, right? So after successfully connecting to the AKS, right, we now need to deploy our services, which is technically our application. But before we deploy that services, let's quickly check the running nodes in our AKS. Cube, control, get nodes, right? So if I hit enter now, this is asking me to log in first before I can see this information. So if you remember the authentication that we selected when we were creating our AKS, we selected Azure RBAC. So whatever role-based access that I have on my account will be issued against the AKS. So I'll copy this URL, then open my browser. So I open this browser now, and then open a new tab, log in this URL, and then copy this code, Ctrl+C, go back to my browser and paste this code here. Then next, I'll just click on use another account, and then I'll supply the name of my account. And then I'll click on continue. And as you can see, I have now successfully signed into Azure, right? So if I go back to my browser, you can see that the command that I issued has now been executed, right? So this is it here, right? So the next thing I'll do is to just clear my screen so that I'll keep everything nice and clean. And then I'll run the command again. And as you can see, this is the node, right? So everything is all set, okay? Everything is working fine and cool. So the next thing is to deploy this application, right? So to deploy that application, remember I said AKS is a managed Kubernetes service that's provided by Azure to deploy containerized application, okay? That means that this voting application must have been packaged as a container, must have been containerized. So how do we know? If you just click on this, I am in the voting app, and inside the example voting app, then I can see this K8S specification. So you drop down on that K8S specification, and these are the containers of our application. So we have the DB deployment, we have the service, we have the Redis deployment, we have the Redis service, we have the result service, and then we have the result deployment. So these are the containers of our application, okay? So whatever we want to deploy would be these containers, right? So to deploy it, I will use the kubectl command, kubectl, then apply -F, then I will specify the name of this folder, which is K8S-specifications. So specifying the name of this folder will go into the folder and deploy everything that is inside of this folder. Okay, so then I'll say K8, then click on tab, and then you see this folder here. So I'll click on enter. So as you can see, we've deployed everything basically that is inside of these K8S specifications. Okay, so to see that, let's quickly go back to Azure, and then in Azure now, this is our AKS, right? So if we come back to workloads, so this is the database, this is the Redis. This database here is Postgres database. So this is Redis. So basically, yeah, we have deployed our application. Having successfully deployed our application, how do we then see this application? How do users see this application? Okay, so what we need to do is we need to get the service. So if I click on services and ingresses, you can see the services here. So workloads, we see our application, and then if I click on services, you see the services here, basically, right? So if you check under type colon, you will see that this is a node port service, right? So what does that mean? That means that this node port service will not have an external IP that users can use to connect to our application, okay? So what do we need to do? Let me quickly show you that we do not have an external IP address, right? So I'll just quickly clear my screen. I can't type clear. So clearing my screen now, then I will say kube control, then get SVC, which is service. So here you can see that we do not have anything against our external IP address, nothing. So this means that users cannot be able to access our application, okay? So what do we do to expose this application so that users can access this application? We've got a few options, but the option that we will be using for the purpose of this tutorial will be to change our service to a load balancer instead of node port, right? So under type here, you see we've got node ports, and this is also node port, right? So we need to expose these two services, results and votes, change it to load balancer so that we can have an external IP address against them, and users can use that external IP address to access our application. So to change this now, I'll come to vote service. So this is vote service now, which is what we essentially have here, right? And then under type, I will change it to load balancer, right? Load balancer, I'll copy this, and then I'll do the same to the result service. So if I click on this result, come here, and then change it to load balancer. So you save it. My VS Code is on autosave. So if I drop down on this file, and then you can see that my VS Code is on autosave. So I have saved that. So the next thing that I will need to do will be to redeploy these services. Okay. So I will say kubectl apply K8, and then I'll press tab, and then so I'll do, I think I will meet -F. So I'll do -F, and then I'll click on enter. So we've now redeployed our votes and our result service, right? So if I execute this command again, kubectl, and then I do kubectl get SVC to get the service, and then you can now see that we have an IP address against our results, right? Our result service, and we also have an IP address against our vote service. So this means that we've exposed these two services and opened up their ports on both 8081 and 8080 for users to be able to access these applications, right? Everything is running within Azure. So if I go back to Azure now, and then I come to services here, as you can see, it's still node port, but if I refresh, it's going to change to load balancer, and then we have an external IP address. So if I click on this external IP address now, then we should see our application. So this is the results, right? And as you can see, we do not have any votes just yet, right? Bring this back. So I'll go back to my Azure and then click on the vote. This is the vote service. So on this one now, we can vote for cats or dogs. So I'll click on dogs, and then I'll come back here, and then you see that dogs has our vote 100%. Okay, so that's it, guys. That's how to deploy this application to Azure Kubernetes Service. So that's it, guys. If you find this tutorial very useful and very helpful, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel.